Sabbath Church. Pastor Helmer here saying hello one more time in this format, in this way, praying, hoping that everyone is doing well, that you are blessed, that you're staying strong in your faith, and you're remaining unshaken, that you're healthy, and that you're stable and as we continue to go through these weird times. First and foremost, forgive me, I didn't have time to change. Had a little bit of an emergency today with the baby. We had to take her to the hospital, and then we had a little bit of scare, but everything's okay. Everything's fine. So had to come here and shoot this in order to have a message for you guys tomorrow. So excuse my I look a little hot and I'm a little underdressed, but the important part today is the message that I bring. Today we'll be looking at Matthew chapter 9, verse 9 to 13. I'm hoping to get through the whole thing, but I want to really focus on verse 9 today. So if you join me, Matthew chapter 9, verse 9, and it says the following. As Jesus went from there, he saw a man named Matthew. Now, let's just stop right there. Now, before, as he opens up, it says that Jesus went from there, meaning he just left the place and he's coming to a different place. Matthew 8:28 tells us that he was in the land of the Gadarenes, which he was with the people of Gadara. And 9:1, he says he left from where he was. Verse 1 says he stepped into the boat and crossed over and came to his own town, which tells us he was in Capernaum. So verse 9, as we know where he is, when he leaves Capernaum, he says, as Jesus went from there. So he leaves that place, that verse 1 of chapter 9 tells us, and he comes to this place, and he comes to a place, and the verse 9 of chapter 9 says, as Jesus went from there, he saw a man named Matthew. He was sitting at the tax collector's booth. Follow me, he told him. Matthew got up and he followed him. Now, we're reading something there's so much to unpack. There's so much to say in regards to this one verse. There's so many questions. So I want to pause here a little bit. There was a man, right? There was a man and his name was Matthew. And where was he seated? He was seated at the tax collector's table. This is where you came. It's the tax table. It's where you were called and you had to come and you had to pay your taxes. So this is what he did. This was his profession. He collected taxes. Now, we've spoken about this before, right? We know the character of Zacchaeus. That these people, these tax collectors, they were actually Jewish people who bought out slots, or they bought out positions or bidded for positions in which they would bid the Roman Empire for positions in which they would collect taxes from the people. Now, they would collect taxes from their own people, and we've established this, that these tax collectors weren't they weren't really honest people. They charged more than they had to. If the tax was 5, they would charge 10, and 5 would be for them. This is how they fed their desires. This is how they fed their dreams. This is everything they wanted. This is how they became rich. This is how they had a lot of money. It's not because they worked hard for it, not because they earned it. It's because they stole it. This was their lifestyle. Now imagine they were known for this. Tax collectors were hated for this. This was their position. Everybody knew that this was what they were doing. Everybody was aware of people like Matthew and Zacchaeus were doing. This was almost embedded into their position. This is what they did. This is how they lived, and nobody liked them. Nobody liked these people. Especially not the Jewish people. The Jewish people didn't like their own people taking advantage of their people. They didn't like Jews taking advantage of Jews and then giving the money over to the Roman Empire. It was a betrayal to a certain sense. What status do you think Matthew had? Do you think Matthew was in a good position? Do you think he had money? He was high society. He had a good job, a job that paid well. Let's put it that way. Yeah, it's estimated that at a tax collector's table, if we bring it to today's money, if we bring it to dollars for today, it's estimated that at any given time, a tax collector's table had roughly anywhere between $30,000 to $35,000 at a table. And the interesting thing is that all of a sudden, this man comes up to Matthew, a stranger in a sense. And probably by the looks of him, when you looked at him, he probably hadn't showered in a couple of days. His clothes probably hadn't been properly washed in maybe a couple of days. His shoes that he had on were probably a little old. He had a poor person's clothes on. He had long hair, and he had 4 men that walked with him, and they probably looked just as disheveled as he did. This man that comes up to Matthew was of a distinct class of people that Matthew was. He wasn't high society. He wasn't a person of money. This man, as we know him, we know Jesus as disheveled as he looks sometimes, possibly because he was sleeping out in the desert. He wasn't sleeping in a nice comfortable bed. He wasn't sleeping in nice hotels. He was laying his head wherever he can lay it. He used to pray till the morning. I mean, this man looked contrary to what Matthew looked like. Matthew was a man of society, of status. Matthew's clothes probably had color in them. They look completely different. Matthew was probably well dressed, showered, and he had his hair well groomed. He was presentable. He had to look presentable because he was representing the Roman Empire to a certain extent, and he was protected by Roman guards. And then there comes this Jesus that looks completely the opposite of what Matthew looked like. And he comes and he looks at Matthew, and he doesn't ask Matthew a question. He doesn't say, "Pretty please." He doesn't say, "You think." He doesn't say, "Well, how do you feel?" He says, "Follow me." That's all he said. He said, "Follow me." And what does Matthew do? It says Matthew got up and he followed him. Now let's stay here. Let's stay in this verse just a little bit longer. I wonder how this interaction occurred. I wonder how Jesus said, "Follow me." Did he yell at him, "Hey, follow me"? Or was he stern and said, "Follow me right now"? Or did he say in a soft tone, in a very humble voice, did he say, "Follow me"? And we have no evidence of Matthew entering into a dialogue, discussing into an argument, asking questions. It doesn't say. The only thing we see is that Jesus makes a request. He makes a demand, and Matthew gets up from the table and he follows him. This tax collector, this man of high position, simply gets up from the table and he follows him. Listen, church, the position that Matthew had, and where Matthew sat, in the circles that Matthew gathered in, and the people that he interacted with, I assure you that Matthew had to have heard the rumors of this man named Jesus. There's this man of Nazareth. There's this son of Joseph. There's this carpenter that's out there. There's this man, and he's gaining a lot of fame. I'm sure Matthew, as he was sitting at his tax table, he heard the stories. Have you heard the man over from Nazarene? Have you heard the man that people are talking about? And they're calling him the Son of God. They're calling him the Son of David, and he's doing certain things. And I'm sure Matthew's Jewishness, I'm sure his tradition, I'm sure everything that he learned in Sabbath school, everything he learned as a kid, I'm sure he starts remembering Isaiah. I'm sure he starts remembering when the prophets say, and the virgin shall conceive, and the mute will speak, and the blind will see, and the lame will walk. And I'm sure Matthew is remembering everything that he learned. And people are saying, hey, some blind person started seeing, some deaf person could hear, the lame started walking. And Matthew, I'm sure, starts putting together all the pieces. He starts putting everything together that he learned. He starts putting together because everything that he knew as a child, everything that he was taught, because he was Jewish to begin with. I'm sure Matthew started putting all the pieces together, and he was saying, could this be? I'm sure Matthew had a curiosity to meet this person because he heard so much about this person named Jesus. Imagine Matthew, okay? Imagine Matthew hears a rumor of a man who is being called the Messiah, who is being called the Son of God, that he is the one who is to fulfill the promise. He is from the lineage of David. Imagine that Matthew is hearing this, right? And Matthew goes back because he's a very intelligent person, and he starts putting all the pieces together, and he's saying, this could possibly be this person. You see, Matthew knew what he was doing. Matthew knew he was a thief. Matthew knew that what he was doing wasn't right. Zacchaeus knew what he was doing wasn't right. Zacchaeus, nobody told him to, but he said, Lord, from here forward, I'm going to give the money back fourfold. He was admitting that what he was doing was wrong. They knew what they were doing was wrong. Now imagine Matthew hearing that the Messiah might be here. I wonder what that did to his conscience. I wonder if he thought, you know what, I need to meet this Jesus. I wonder if he slowly, maybe there's a part of him that started saying, you know what, I really need to change. I'm sure Matthew wanted to meet him. I'm sure Matthew wanted to know who he was. I'm sure Matthew was hoping to run into him. He had an expectation, desire to know who he is, to see him, to talk to him, possibly to ask him a few questions. And then finally, one day, as Matthew is stealing from people, as Matthew is in the process of robbing people, as he's sitting at the tax table, as he's in the middle of his sin, he's in the middle of his sin, he's cheating people as he's doing that, as he's taking money from people, taking money that doesn't belong to him, as he's stealing from them. Jesus comes. Follow me, he says. Matthew drops everything and he follows him. I wonder what Matthew was thinking. I wonder how he was feeling. I wonder what went through his head. But what I do know is that in the moment that Jesus said, follow me, he knew that this is what he had to do. I'm sure, I have no doubt that there was this willingness from Matthew. After hearing all the rumors of this Jesus, maybe there's something inside of him that began to desire change. There's existed or a willingness developed, or a willingness was placed inside of him. Matthew knew what he was doing was wrong. Verse 10. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. Jesus says, Matthew, follow me. And Matthew gets up and he follows Jesus, and they go to Matthew's house. The first thing Jesus was going to change was Matthew's home, was the person of Matthew. The first thing on the agenda to change was Matthew's home. And to use that home no longer to dwell, no longer to show off, no longer to demonstrate all the money you have and all the money that you stole with all your tax collector friends, as maybe you got together and you bragged about how much money you have. This time, Jesus takes Matthew to his home, and this time there's tax collectors. It's not just him as a tax collector, it's other tax collectors that are there with Matthew, and what they're doing is they're all the thieves, all the people who rob, all the people who take from other people, they're all sitting there together in the house of Matthew. All the thieves are together and they're listening to Jesus preach the gospel, to preach salvation. You know, Peter, it was believed that Peter was a revolutionary. He was a type of individual that was involved with overthrowing the Roman government. It's the reason he carried a knife. And people like Peter didn't like people like Matthew. They considered them traitors. They considered them people who were sellouts to their own community. And all of a sudden, Peter is in a home with Matthew. And not just with Matthew, but he's in the home with Matthew's friends, with all the thieves, and with all the people that steal from Israel, with all the people that steal from the poor. They're all sitting there, all together. God's chosen, the four chosen that were chosen so far, and Matthew and all the other thieves that Matthew hung around with. All of his friends, all of his buddies, all of his comrades, they were now in the house. And now together, Matthew, what he was doing is he was using his home no longer as a place to maybe demonstrate how much money or show off. Now he was using it as a temple, as a church, as a place where the word of God can be spoken. It doesn't matter who you are. And it doesn't matter your sin. The word of God is needed. Always needed. Whether you consider yourself a great sinner or a person who tells fibs and little white lies, we all need Jesus in the same amount, in large quantity. I asked myself a question. Let me ask you the question. I ask myself sometimes, I wonder where I would be if I wasn't here. I wonder where I would be at this moment if I wasn't standing here. What would have occurred what would have happened to my life if when Jesus came to my table and I did not respond to his call? As I look at myself in the mirror, and I'm very honest with myself, I look at the type of person that I am. And I see three possible outcomes. One is a alcoholic. The other one is doing some time in jail. And possibly the third would possibly be dead. I think those would be the three different types of situations I would have if God never came to my table. If I never got up from the table and responded to the call. It took Matthew one time. Jesus came once. Matthew, follow me. And that was it. How many times did it take for you and I? How many times did he come to the table? How many times did he come to the center of our sin as we're sinning, as we're in the middle of sinning at our very best, and Jesus comes and he says, come on, follow me. And we don't. We like, yeah, maybe later. Or we don't. Or I got something else to do. Or we didn't really hear what he said. And Jesus says, follow me. And you're like, well, what'd you say? Right? And how many times did he come? And he comes over and over, and he comes and he asks, follow me. How many times did it take till I finally responded and I said, yes, I'll follow you? You see, the problem in this church that when we follow, right, we start filling up ourselves with things, and Jesus says, follow me, and you start grabbing things, and you're like, okay, hold on, I'm coming, I'm going to follow you. And when the truth of the matter is that Jesus didn't say, go ahead and follow me and bring all that stuff you have on the table. He just said, get up and follow me. Follow me. I'm going to take you somewhere. Just leave everything there. But we want to grab everything, and we want to grab things, and we want to follow him. And Jesus never said, go ahead and follow me, but bring all those things you have there. Leave them where they are. And follow me. Many of us are still carrying things that we grabbed from that table when we got up and we decided to follow him. Some of us think that we're following him, but the reality is that we're still sitting at that table. Unwilling to give it all up, unwilling to trust him completely, unwilling to just let him rule our lives, to give it up all for him. We're unwilling. And we're unwilling because we cease to recognize that 2,000 years ago, on the cross in Calvary, he gave it all up for us. No excuses. Held nothing back. Gave everything. Every drop of blood. For you and for me. There was no condition in his sacrifice. So let there be no condition in ours. The Lord bless you and may he keep you until we congregate again. Pastor.